Welcome back to the goddamn Evil Broomstick channel. My name is Midsommar, and this video is going to be about Ari Aster's and A24's Midsommar. I did not hate this movie. That is just my clickbait title to get people to watch this and be outraged. But it does stand true in that I did not like Midsommar. I was very, very disappointed by Midsommar. It was at least top 3 most anticipated movies of the year for me. Like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Avengers Endgame, and Midsommar. I love A24. I love horror films, obviously, indie horrors. I'm all about it, and Ari Aster made, in my opinion, one of the best horror films maybe ever last year with Hereditary. I was such a huge fan of Hereditary, and I was so excited to see, after like one of the best directorial debuts ever, what he does next with Midsommar. And Midsommar, by the way, spoilers for Midsommar and Hereditary here. Midsommar is also, it's similar to Hereditary in both that they are cult films. Hereditary, you don't know that's a cult film the whole way through, but you eventually figure out that it's this satanic cult trying to essentially resurrect and find a body for King Payman. And in this, it's very blatant that they're going to this camp, this festival that is basically a cult family doing freaky, crazy things. Midsommar, the first 20 to 30 minutes, I believe, that's where I was sold. That's where I was loving the movie, because it promises a different movie. You see the sister of Danny who kills herself. She's bipolar, and she takes the mother and father with her. And you see Danny, like, trying to cope with this grief. And then at the same time, there's drama between the boyfriend and the girlfriend. And that stuff I was super into. I was super into every little conversation and tough. It felt so real. The phone calls between Danny and her boyfriend, Florence Pugh and Jack Rayner. That stuff was fantastic, and the friends not liking the girlfriend and her trying to go on this trip with them, and it was this awkward like vibe and these awkward interactions and her having to make small talk. I was so enjoying all of that. And when that was all being set up, I was thinking we were really in store for something, because they were setting up so many different character dynamics and interactions and like certain like dramas and then like relationships that could really lead to something in the story. And she had just witnessed this traumatic, death, murder in her family, and she was dealing with all that, and that I was super into. When they get to the cult is where the film started to lose me. Will Poulter being in like the first half of this movie kind of saved it for me because of his comedy. Now, I don't need comedy in my horror. Hereditary barely has any comedy in it, and I loved it. But when I was so bored as I was with Midsommar, Will Poulter was like the saving grace, because Midsommar is very much a test of your patience. Now, they're slow-paced films, but Midsommar it's 2 hours, 20 minutes. It's 13 minutes longer than Hereditary, but Hereditary feels like a 90-minute movie, where Midsommar felt like a 3-hour movie. What shocks me about Midsommar, it's gotten good critical reviews so far. Let me check right here. It's got an 80% on Rotten Tomatoes from critics, a 72% from audiences. The 72% is what shocks me, because when you look at these indie horror films, the great ones, usually they do awful with audiences, like It Follows and Babadook and The Witch and stuff like that. Hereditary actually has a lower audience score with 64%. It has an 89% critic score. But Midsommar so far, only 349 reviews from audiences, but 72%. And it shocks me, because this movie, I feel like, abandoned almost all story and developed into what I don't love, and it turned into a shock value movie. All the character dynamics and my care for the characters, eventually, as the festival or the Midsommar, whatever they want to call it, the cult stuff went on, the less I cared for them and their well-being. And the more slow-paced and more drawn-out every scene was, the more I just wanted these characters to die. Now, I feel if this film was edited down, it's 2 hours, 20 minutes. I feel like everything they shot ended up being on screen, because there's so much they could have trimmed down. They could have made this movie trim down 40 minutes and still gotten all the same points across. It's that everything is dragged out. People have to sit down at tables. We see characters sitting down at tables, grabbing forks and knives, and then eating multiple times in the movie, and every time it takes like 2 minutes for them to sit down and grab their fork and knife. It's just like moving at this speed, like. So much of this, you didn't need to draw it out that many times and do it that repeatedly, it just gets tiring to watch. And they did that so much, and after a while I realized, like, especially towards that last hour, it felt like it was just doing things for shock value. It felt like towards the second half of the film, especially in that final hour, they abandoned all character dynamics and conflicts that they were setting up for just for shock value. It felt as if so many character storylines were just abandoned. Like, there was things that I was super interested in, because between all the like slow paced drawn out cult stuff, there were these like character quarrels and relationships that they sort of very lightly would delve into, and I was very into them, but then they would never touch back on them. Like when Jack Rayner, who plays Christian, and Christian tries to steal Josh's thesis, because Josh is doing a thesis on the overall Midsommar experience, and Christian tries to steal him, and there's this back and forth, and I thought that scene was great, but then they never really do much with it. Bele, he's the one who introduces all his friends to the Midsummer Festival and brings them out there to Sweden or wherever it is. Him having romantical feelings for Danny, and him saying like he's better for her than Christian is. That was something very interesting, but it was never really touched upon. Her losing her parents in the beginning, and her sister, and all this tragedy that you thought was going to be a major point in the movie because they spent about 20 minutes setting it up, never comes into fruition, never becomes really a part of the story. It just becomes shock value. You're watching these characters die off and like take drugs and get killed, and new weird cult stuff every time. But it felt like none of that meant anything. And Hereditary definitely did have some shock value stuff and get very graphic and very violent at times, but all the way through you cared about the story. It was so much driven by narrative and driven by its characters. I felt like this movie had none of that with the characters. They could have, because they had like the seeds there, but they didn't follow up on them. They didn't let them grow and flourish into things that could have led to a more interesting movie, because instead they just settle for shock value. Now, like, I liked when the characters, the woman and the man, jumped off the cliff. That was cool. That scene didn't need to be 25 minutes long, but it was cool and it was interesting and, somewhat entertaining after the slow pace, like 5 minutes of walking, 5 minutes of sitting, 5 minutes of picking up your fork, 5 minutes of singing. Characters are getting killed. They're copying the Wicker Man and putting the guy in the bear suit, and he's just going to be reactionless, and we're just going to watch his face in the bear suit like this. But that's what this movie felt like, so many other cult movies, but just one that's going to go the extra mile and be extra disturbing and extra drawn out. And it makes up for it in how pretty it is and how beautiful it is to look at, because the cinematography is incredible. The whole film is gorgeous, but it doesn't hide the fact or stop the fact that there's really no narrative towards that second half, except just what weird, crazy thing can we do next? What character could we kill off next? And what drugs can we do next? And you lose all care for the characters because you don't delve into how they're feeling. We just see Danny dry heaving every now and then when she's reminded of her parents. Also, this movie is billed as a horror movie. It's pitched, it's marketed as a horror movie. Midsommar is not a horror movie. It's a drama, I guess, but it's like the whole movie's in broad daylight, so it's already hard to make a horror movie that's entirely in very bright broad daylight, but they never try to scare you. Unless you're scared of what the cult's intentions are, even though it's very obvious that it's a creepy, crazy cult that's doing crazy stuff, this movie never does try to scare you. It never tries to be scary. So I don't know why it's pitched as a horror film, because it's not. That's A24 trying to deceive you into thinking Ari Aster made another horror film. Ari Aster made a cult movie that we've seen a million times before. I mean, Ty West made this movie. I think it was called The Last Sacrament, and it was basically the same thing. I was very much reminded of Green Inferno, Eli Ross movie in this, where it's like a group of college kids go off. This time, instead of to like a cult, they go to a tribe in Green Inferno, and then they slowly all get killed and murdered and find out that they're crazy people. And it's just, that's what Midsommar was. I don't get the people praising it as this like next level masterpiece. Like, aside from how beautiful it is, how great, like the costumes, the sets, everything, like that's all incredible. But as a story and as characters, it's nothing like special. It's just pretty mediocre. I'm not going to remember these characters. I'm not going to remember this story, and I'm not going to rewatch this movie. I've seen creepy cult movies, and this was just another one of them. And that's my biggest issue with Midsommar, because Hereditary, especially after Hereditary, this directorial debut, you see so much in Ari Aster, and you know he can make another great horror film, or another great film in general. But instead, we get this one that's pitched as a horror film, but it's not. And it's just more like, let's see how gory we can get, let's see how weird we can get, let's see how much nudity and graphic sex we could put in our movie, and people singing and screaming. But the focus should have been, let's tell a compelling story, let's have compelling, memorable characters and dynamics between them, and set up some conflicts. You're just waiting for all of them to get killed off by this cult, and it becomes very boring because you know the inevitable. Now, yes, that flower costume was incredible and amazing, but I don't feel like even the finale of the movie. Now, I know a lot of people don't like the finale of Hereditary, but this finale especially, just like, she finally killed the boyfriend. Whoop-de-doo. Definitely the most disappointing movie I've seen all year. I really did think I was going to love this movie, but it was not for me. For me, it was just a movie that wasn't edited, wasn't cut down. They used every single shot of every character walking for 5 minutes, sitting for 5 minutes, and you just basically patiently waiting for them all to die and get killed. And it was just so incredibly boring and had no real substance. It's just characters doing drugs in a weird cult and getting killed. And there just was not enough to it. Nothing compelling about it. Did not care about the characters. Don't remember the characters. And I hate to say that about this movie, but it was just a huge, huge disappointment. Let me know what you thought about Midsommar. Am I an insane person for not liking it? Which do you prefer, Midsommar or Hereditary? For me, Hereditary, I've seen it like 6 or 7 times probably by now. I love Hereditary. Midsommar was a huge step down for Ari Aster in my opinion, but I'm still going to watch any Ari Aster movie he makes. I'm still just on Hereditary alone, and by how beautiful Midsommar was and how good the first 15 minutes were, I'm still very excited for anything Ari Aster makes. So there's the end of that, and I'm tired. I'm gonna go to bed. Tomorrow's 4th of July. Well, actually, today's 4th of July. I'll probably get this video up on like the 5th or 6th of July though, because I'm lazy and I'm gonna be throwing fireworks and drinking today. So, you know, good luck to you. Have a good 4th of July. Hope you stay safe and don't get pulled over drunk and driving. I'm gonna get out of here. I think this one will be the thumbnail.